accommodate anything. Creation as a hypothesis is the most accommodating hypothesis you could ever imagine, because the creator could have done it however he wanted to, he or she wanted to. But accommodation is not the same as explanation. And a theory that accommodates everything explains nothing, because you can't distinguish between anything. And then, I mean, that's why I believe creation is not science. Not because of any personal religious biases, but rather because you can't test it. Science is based upon testing your claims. You cannot test for the creation model. Like I said, he talks about all these things that he believes couldn't have occurred naturally. And those, like I said, just fall under arguments from incredulity. You just can't possibly imagine how they would occur naturally. Well, if there was no alternative theory, I could understand how that's very alluring. If there was no other natural way to explain it, I can understand why everyone would want to believe that a creator did these things. There is an alternative, though, and that is evolution. And evolution is not just a hypothesis. It's a theory that's been tested, attempted to falsify for over 150 years, and it has not been falsified. And is that because, scientists are atheists or are they anti-religion? It's not because of any of those reasons. It's because that's where the evidence has led to. Evolution is not a conspiracy. There's just so much evidence to support it. He himself claims, he agrees that microevolution is a fact. And he claims that from microevolution, you cannot get to macroevolution. Macroevolution distinguishing, speciation, evolution above and beyond the species level. He claims that that does not occur. However, he fails to actually advance any theory or any hypothesis to explain why there is a barrier there. He doesn't assert any barrier. He just washes it away and says there is no macroevolution. But microevolution, being no barrier afterwards, can turn into macroevolution, taking into account environmental factors. There's all kinds of documentation of species diverting because of geographical occurrences, and over time, they become a different species. That's macroevolution. We witness that. And that's not something that we have to interpret from the fossil record, although we do see that. We actually see those things happening in real time. Do we see, as he said, a lizard turning into a bird? No, because that's just ridiculous. No evolutionist claims that. That's not what evolution says. Evolution does not say that birds or lizards turn into birds just overnight, not in our lifetime. These are gradual changes that have took roughly, I think last estimate, or last figure I read was that the earliest life forms were supposed to have occurred around 3.8 billion years ago. So this isn't a lifetime occurrence. This is not something that any of us is going to witness. I'll just go through some of the evidences for evolution. Actually, I'd like to talk about complexity first, because that's a big feature in his opening statement. He argues that because things are so complex and very finely detailed, that indicates design to him. I actually argue that complexity is not necessarily an indication of design. I argue that complexity in a lot of cases in terms of human ordeals is an indication of design. We see electronics around us, they are very complex. We can logically conclude their design. But there's one big key feature that we're missing. We've seen these electrons be produced by human hands. We know we can go to the factory. You can't go to the factory where God creates things. That's one key difference, and I know that that's kind of oversimplifying, but it is a big, big deal. So complexity in my opinion, doesn't necessarily indicate design. And I'd like to actually share an example. It's not, full proof of what I'm trying to say, but I think it's fairly poignant. I actually just read this example a few days ago. If you were walking out in the middle of nowhere and you came upon a pile of stones, and they're all irregularly shaped, and they're all different sizes and different colors, and they're all formed from different minerals, and then in the middle of that pile you found a brick, just a plain red brick. If you were to actually try to describe the brick and the stones, you could describe the brick by using 3 measurements: length, width, and height. The stones, you would have to have a much more complex, detailed description of it. You couldn't describe it just by 3 measurements. There's much more that goes into describing an irregularly shaped stone. And now, I think everyone in here would agree that the stone is more than likely the one that was designed. Whereas the brick was the one more than likely designed, whereas the stones more than likely arose from natural processes. And so like I said, that's not exactly proof that complexity doesn't indicate design. All I'm saying is that complexity doesn't inherently imply design. And I think that's an example that most of us can reach. One more thing about complexity. Supposedly, a super intelligent creator created all of this, and all this complexity is due to his workings. I find that a little odd, considering that in terms of engineering, usually the goal is simplicity. The goal when you're trying to achieve an objective with whatever tools or resources you're using is simplicity. If you can't solve a problem in a simplistic manner, that's when you assert the complexity. That's when you insert the complexity. So in terms of complexity being a design goal, the only design that we know of, human design, speaks otherwise. And I don't understand why you can assert that just because it's complex, it obviously indicates design. When in our own species, we are always striving for simplicity. If there was a computer that could function as well as the computers that we have today, that was 10 times more simple, we would all be buying those. We don't, because we can't. Complexity, all the electronics that go into computers are there because we can't figure out how to achieve the results without using all that complexity, without all the extra spare parts, and all these types of things. So in terms of complexity indicating design, I think that's not necessarily true, and I think that's actually, again, falls under the argument that it's so complex it must have been a designer. But again, there's an alternative description, and that description has held up for 150 years, and that is evolution. And I'll just go through a couple of pieces of evidence to support evolution. I'm sure a lot of you have heard a lot of these things I'm going to state, but they are important. And I think if you actually go and do the research like Bill encouraged, don't listen to us. Go out and do the research for yourself. I'm not an evolutionary biologist. I'm not a biologist by any means. I have a very rudimentary understanding of biology and evolution. So I'm not, don't come to me for your answers. Don't come to a debate for your answers. Debates are about entertainment. Go and do the research for yourself. Go online, read the books. I listed 4 websites, I think, 4 or 5 websites that you can go to, and you can find all kinds of evidence to support evolution. And I mean, all you have to do is just take the paper home, and you can just search for yourself, and there's thousands more out there. So I'll just run through a couple things. One of the pieces of evidence that evolution is the most likely explanation for how we arose is that all organisms share a fundamental unity in terms of their, in terms of mechanisms of replication, heritability, catalysis, and metabolism. That says a lot because, granted, yes, a creator could have designed it, but again, that's accommodation, that's not explanation. We're looking for a natural way to explain things. That's what science is. So if you're looking to explain something, a creator, it's almost useless in terms of explanation. Vestigial organs, rudimentary eye holes, wings that are useless for flight. These are all vestigial organs that show that these transitions are occurring. The organism that has these rudimentary body parts has used them for other, it's called co-option. When an organ is passed on to you and you don't use it for its original intended purpose, or it's not complete for its intended purpose, you co-opt it for another use, and it becomes part of your regular existence. That's how organisms have functioned for many, many times. Another thing is it's called an atavism, something that reoccurs in a particular species that did not occur in its direct immediate ancestor, but did occur in its ancestor much further down the line. These things become dormant in their immediate ancestors and reappear in the species that we now know. And these only occur consistent with the evolutionary pathways that we hypothesize. So they're not random. They only occur within the direct line of descent. Fossil evidence is one of the main things that people always talk about. I know a lot of people like to say there's no transitional fossils. Again, go do your research. You'll find transitional fossils from all kinds of species throughout the line. And transitional doesn't mean that it's the immediate ancestor and immediate descendant of a particular species. It just means it shows a mosaic of features and it fits in the right place and time where we believe that transition to have occurred. DNA evidence, again, these are very basic ones that everyone always talks about. Similar organisms, morphologically speaking, have much closer DNA than organisms that don't appear to be similar. It didn't come out very right, but I think you guys get the point. One thing I'd like to talk about, and this will take a minute or two to explain,